At 9:37 local time in Bandar Abbas, Iran, the harbor still looked intact. That was the illusion. Along the piers, Iranian crews were preparing ships, checking systems, moving through routines they had practiced for years. From a distance, it looked disciplined, controlled, almost calm. But what they did not know was that the window for preparation had already closed. US planners had decided that morning would not be about warning shots, signaling, or gradual escalation. It would be about removing combat power before it could even leave the dock. And in a harbor built to project pressure into the Strait of Hormuz, that changed everything. The strategic danger was never that Iran would win a classic fleet battle in open water. That was the wrong lens. The real danger was density. Too many missile boats, too many drones, too many launch points packed too close to one of the most important shipping corridors on the planet. In a place like Hormuz, even an aging frigate becomes dangerous if it can fire before you stop it. Even a small fast attack craft matters if it disappears into civilian traffic with a missile on board. That's what made the harbor so important. It was not just an anchorage, it was a compressed launch system. Ships, drone platforms, missile crews, logistics, and command relationships were all sitting inside one coastal battle space. If those elements dispersed on schedule, the problem for the US Navy would multiply fast. A missile fired from shore, a drone launched from a converted deck, and a swarm boat hiding behind a tanker do not need perfect coordination to create paralysis. They just need to overload decisions. That's where the American calculation became brutally simple. Do not wait for the network to spread out. Break it while it is still plugged in. Cruise missiles were the obvious first instrument because they solved the hardest opening problem in naval warfare: distance without warning. A strike aircraft can be tracked. A warship can be watched, but a sea-skimming cruise missile arrives late on the defender's radar picture and gives crews the one thing they never have enough of: too little time. Like hearing glass break downstairs after the intruder is already inside. The warning comes after the problem has begun, and by 9:37 that problem was already inbound. The first sign that the operation had truly begun did not come from a radio call or a radar warning. It came from the sky too late to matter. By 9:55 local time, the opening American weapons were already in their terminal phase, dropping low over the terrain and using the coastline itself to sharpen their final approach. That detail matters. Long-range cruise missiles are not just fast projectiles with a target programmed into memory. Their real advantage is how they navigate in clutter. Once they cross land, they can compare hills, shoreline shapes, and elevation changes against preloaded maps, almost like a driver suddenly recognizing the road after miles of fog. That lets them correct small navigation errors just before impact and arrive with far more precision than older strike weapons. And that precision was the whole point. The US Navy was not simply trying to hit the harbor. It was trying to hit readiness. A frigate tied to a pier is vulnerable in ways a ship at sea is not. Launch crews are still moving. Combat systems may be powered but not fully aligned. Missiles can be aboard without being fully prepared for immediate firing. In those final minutes before a ship becomes combat effective, everything looks calm from the outside. Internally, it is the most fragile phase of the cycle. That's where the problem began for Iran. On the pier, crews still had tasks left to complete. Consoles had to finish booting. Launch checks had to be confirmed. Weapons teams had to move from preparation to execution. In peacetime drills, that timeline feels manageable. In real combat, those minutes vanish. A ship can go from potentially dangerous to completely irrelevant before its crew even understands the engagement has started. When the first impact hit, it did more than tear steel apart. It collapsed sequence. Fire and blast pressure spread across the pier. Fragments ripped through nearby equipment. And smoke started swallowing the visual geometry of the harbor. That created a second-order effect American planners would have known well. Once a harbor fills with fire, debris, and moving smoke, target identification becomes harder for everyone. Friend, foe, follow-on strike package. It affects all of them. That is one of the hidden truths of modern precision warfare. The first successful hit can make the second one harder. But if the timing holds, it also makes the enemy's response nearly impossible. Because now, Iran was no longer preparing to fight. It was reacting inside the wreckage of a fight it had already started losing. The first explosion damaged the harbor. The second one decided whether the harbor could still fight. That distinction is critical. In naval combat, the opening hit often creates confusion, but confusion alone does not guarantee success. A damaged frigate can still launch missiles. A shocked crew can still recover. A ship wreathed in smoke can still become dangerous if its weapons remain intact and its command team keeps enough control to act. That is why follow-on targeting matters so much. The real objective is not spectacle, it is interruption. And interruption is harder than it sounds. By the time the first American missile struck, smoke was already beginning to deform the visual picture around the piers. Flames distort, shadows shift, debris changes outlines. That may sound like a cinematic detail, but operationally it is a serious problem. Many terminal guidance systems rely on matching what the weapon sees in the final seconds against a stored image or scene profile. In simple terms, the missile is looking for a face it memorized before launch. If the harbor suddenly no longer looks like the harbor in the reference image, the weapon has to resolve uncertainty at the worst possible moment. That's the risk no one watching from afar ever sees. Precision weapons are not magic. They are decision machines operating inside shrinking time windows. If smoke hides the intended aim point, the missile may still strike the target area, but not the exact point that matters most. Against a warship, a miss by even a short distance can mean the difference between disabling launch capability and merely damaging the superstructure. One result changes the battle, the other just adds fire. That is why the second strike carried so much weight. If it landed correctly, another major combatant would be taken out before it could contribute to the defense of the strait. If it failed, Iran would still have a frigate with anti-ship missiles, sensors, and symbolic value intact enough to enter the fight. And symbolism matters at sea. A surviving warship in a burning harbor sends a message: we were hit, but we are still in it. That can stiffen command decisions far beyond the tactical value of the ship itself. Instead, the second impact turned damage into collapse. And that changed everything. Because once two major hulls are lost in the same opening sequence, the rest of the harbor stops thinking in terms of mission execution and starts thinking in terms of survival. Officers are no longer asking, how fast can we sortie? They are asking, what is still working, what is on fire, and what is about to explode next? That shift in mindset is often the real turning point. The missiles were destroying ships, but the deeper effect was that they were destroying confidence in the system holding the harbor together. Losing frigates was serious. Losing time was worse, because while fire and smoke were swallowing the main piers, another threat was already moving from dangerous to urgent. North of the first impacts, Iran's forward drone launch platform was still operating, and that changed the geometry of the fight almost immediately. A frigate threatens you with a missile battery and a radar picture. A drone ship threatens you with repetition. It can keep generating problems faster than you can clear them. That is what made it so dangerous. Cheap one-way attack drones do not need to be individually impressive. They are dangerous for the same reason hail is dangerous to an aircraft on the ground. One strike may not destroy the system, but enough of them arriving at the wrong time can overwhelm protection, distract air crews, and force commanders to spend expensive interceptors on targets that cost a fraction as much to launch. That exchange ratio matters. In modern warfare, the side that forces the other to burn through time and munitions on low-cost threats is already shaping the battle. And that changed the American priority list fast. A ship launching drones from inside a cluttered harbor is not just another target, it is a time-sensitive node. Every minute it survives means more aircraft to track, more small radar signatures to classify, and more chances for one of them to slip through the screen. The US response had to account for that. Not with noise, not with panic. With a weapon designed for exactly this kind of target. That is where the long-range anti-ship missile came in. Unlike older anti-ship weapons that depend heavily on outside guidance, newer systems are built to think their way through the final approach. They can use passive sensing, which means they do not have to announce themselves by radiating energy like a flashlight in a dark room. Instead, they listen. Radar emissions, communications activity, navigation signals, anything the ship is already giving away. It is the difference between hunting by shouting and hunting by hearing someone breathe. That's a big difference, because in a harbor under attack, positions change. Ships drift, smoke shifts. The exact point a planner studied hours earlier may no longer be the point that matters. A missile that can adapt in the terminal phase is not just more accurate, it is more useful in chaos. And chaos was now everywhere. So while American fighters were also being pulled toward low, slow drone contacts already entering the battle space, the real race was this. Could the drone carrier be destroyed before it generated too many threats for the outer screen to handle cleanly? That was the pressure. Not just hit the ship, hit it before its launch cycle changed the rest of the battle. What happened next is where modern warfare stops looking clean on a briefing slide. Because the same American fighters tasked with helping shut down the harbor were suddenly being forced to deal with a second problem in real time. Airborne threats already moving out over the water. That is the danger of a layered defense. One target set pulls your attention low and close, while another forces you to think farther ahead. If you focus on only one, the other starts writing the next phase of the battle for you. That's exactly what was happening here. The drones coming off the launch platform were not fast, glamorous, or technologically elegant. They did not need to be. Their value came from profile and timing. Flying low over water, small enough to blend into clutter, they forced pilots and ship crews to solve the hardest kind of tactical puzzle: identify, lock, and kill something cheap before it gets close enough to become expensive. It is like trying to swat a metal bird skimming across a highway while you are also driving through traffic at speed. You may win, but not comfortably, and that changed the job of the strike package. Now the pilots were no longer just delivering weapons. They were dividing attention between offense and immediate defense. Some threats could be handled with heat-seeking missiles, but that was not always ideal. Small drones often produce weak thermal signatures, especially compared with larger aircraft. That means a weapon designed to chase a hot engine can struggle against something that gives off little more heat than a lawnmower. In those moments, the solution becomes brutally old-fashioned. Get closer and use the gun. That takes skill. It also takes time. And time was the one thing the Americans were trying to deny everyone inside the harbor. Meanwhile, the long-range anti-ship missile launched against the drone carrier was doing something important in the background. It was operating independently of the cockpit drama. That is one of the quiet revolutions in naval air warfare. Once released, certain weapons no longer need a pilot to babysit them through the last miles. They keep hunting, while the aircraft that launched them turns to survive the next problem. In practical terms, that means one pilot can start one kill chain and then immediately switch to another. And that changed everything. Because while the fighters were tearing down the drones already in the air, the missile headed for the ship that was creating them. If it struck where intended, the launch platform would not just be damaged, it would be silenced at the source, cutting off the next wave before it ever left the deck. That is the real logic of high-end combat. Do not just shoot the arrow. Break the hand that keeps reaching for more. By this stage, the battle was no longer about whether Iran had been hit hard. It had. The question now was whether any major warship could still leave harbor, restore some measure of control, and turn the fight from a collapse into a contest. And that put the focus on the ship that on paper mattered most, Iran's flagship. This is where a lot of people misunderstand naval power. A flagship is not automatically the most lethal vessel in the fleet. Often, it is the ship burdened with the most symbolism. It carries institutional pride, public messaging, and years of political investment. It is the vessel shown in parades, featured in state media, and pointed to as proof that a navy can still stand in the modern era. But symbolism does not make steel stronger. It does not speed up outdated sensors. And it does not prepare a crew for what happens when real precision strike warfare arrives all at once. That's where the problem began. The American pilots pushing toward the eastern anchorage were entering a different kind of risk than the earlier long-range shots. Cruise missiles and autonomous anti-ship weapons are ideal when you can pre-plan the problem. But some targets still demand human judgment in the final seconds. A warship tied close to infrastructure, partially masked by harbor clutter, and protected by layered air defenses creates exactly that kind of situation. Hit the wrong point and you may damage topside equipment without killing propulsion. Strike too late and the crew reaches its launchers. Wait too long and the ship gets a chance to join the fight. So this became a timing problem measured in seconds. The attack profile itself was unforgiving. The missile chosen for the job gave the pilot something invaluable: live terminal guidance. But it also imposed a cost. He had to stay close enough to guide the weapon through the final phase, which meant remaining inside the outer pressure ring of anti-aircraft guns and surface-to-air defenses longer than any pilot would prefer. Think of it like performing surgery while someone is trying to kick the door off the operating room hinges. Precision was possible, comfort was not, and that changed everything. Because now this was not just a weapons release, it was a contest between two clocks. One was the American pilot guiding the strike into the most vulnerable section of the hull. The other was the Iranian crew racing to turn readiness into retaliation. If the missile hit the engineering spaces cleanly, the flagship would lose its ability to matter before it ever truly entered the battle. If not, the harbor might still produce one final, very dangerous response. In modern naval warfare, that is often the hidden truth. The deadliest moment is not always when a ship is firing. Sometimes it is the minute just before it gets the chance. By noon, the visible battle was already moving toward its conclusion. Burning piers, damaged hulls, drone launch capacity shattered, major combatants either destroyed, crippled, or trapped inside a harbor that no longer functioned as an organized battle space. But the most important result was not the smoke rising over Bandar Abbas. It was the collapse of a strategic assumption Iran had spent years building. That assumption was simple. In the Strait of Hormuz, density could compensate for weakness. Pack enough missile boats, drones, frigates, coastal batteries, and improvised launch platforms into the same operating area, and eventually even a stronger navy would be forced to slow down, spread out, and react defensively. Iran did not need a classic fleet victory for that idea to work. It only needed to make the cost of keeping the strait open feel unstable, unpredictable, and politically dangerous. For years, that was a credible theory. After a strike like this, it becomes a much harder theory to sell, because what the US operation demonstrated was not just superior firepower. It demonstrated sequencing. That matters more. The Americans were not randomly destroying targets. They were dismantling the chain that made the whole defensive concept function. First, take readiness away from the ships still tied to their piers. Then remove the platform generating low-cost airborne threats. Then prevent the most symbolically important combatant from restoring command presence. Then force the remaining fast attack craft into a broken, improvised fight instead of the coordinated swarm they were built for. That is how modern high-end warfare really works. Not as one dramatic punch, but as a methodical attack on timing, coordination, and confidence. And that changed everything. It also revealed something broader about contemporary naval combat. Big platforms still matter, but only as part of a system. A drone ship without air cover becomes a target. A flagship without protected sensor space becomes a liability. Fast attack craft without synchronized launch timing turn into fugitives with missiles. In other words, the myth of distributed danger only works when the distribution stays coherent. Once that coherence breaks, the whole structure starts to fail much faster than it looks like it should. That may be the real lesson here. The harbor did not just lose ships. It lost the ability to turn geography into leverage. And in the Strait of Hormuz, that may be the difference between threatening global commerce and merely surviving the next round.